Hello everybody, my name is Boulevard and welcome to my 2023 World Championship Power Rankings. We've got a lot to go over as far as preamble, so I'm going to dive right into it. Starting off with my World's Power Rankings from the previous year, just to give you an idea of kind of where we fell, the pitfalls that I fell into, and what I'm looking to improve upon. So, I got 6 out of 16 players' placements correct last year, which is not great. We would have liked to see closer to like 9 or 10. I think some of my reasonings were solid. For example, Smooth Swallowist, I said was a bit of a gambler, and I wasn't really sure where that would end up placing them, which I feel justified in because they brought the triple Light of Acacia. That feels like a pretty gambly card, and it paid off for Smooth. They ended up in the top 8. Put Aragorn a little bit higher, but the major pitfall that I fell into was like overhyping the Americas. And betting on the wrong second APAC play. Nobody I think predicted all 5 EMEA players to get in there, at least not anyone reasonable. So yeah, last year was a little bit of an outlier. We're looking to improve upon this in general though, and guess a little bit more of the top 16 correctly. Then we want to talk about power rankings because there's a lot of different ways that you can actually do power rankings, right? Is it who you think is the best player? Is it who you think is the most likely to win the world championship? Is it based purely off of results? You're going to see a mix of things coming out of me, but I'm going to go over each player individually and explain them. Also, I decided to just do a top 16. If I did all 64 players, this video would be forever, and realistically, the bottom 20 spots mean absolutely nothing, and then the next 20 spots mean very little. It's really just like top 16, top 24, maybe even like top 32, where you're getting actual good information. So I wanted to just do the top 16. I have some honorable mentions that I'll be talking about because ultimately this isn't just about the power rankings, this is about just like talking about the players. So that's what we're going to be doing. Before we get into that, there's something else that I did, which is I broke down everybody into just their numbers for the year. So as you can see here, the way this chart goes is like I have your total number of top cuts for the year, and then how those top cuts actually played out, merging top 64 and top 32 together, because that's just kind of how my brain functions, and it's my tier list, so I get to do this however I want. Couple of problems that I ran into with this. Number one, name changes. Couple of players changed their name anywhere from 1 to 3 times over the course of the year, and while I'm confident that I caught most of them, I'm also pretty confident I didn't catch all of them. So a couple of these players might be missing a top cut or two. On top of that, I do not have the World Ender Seasonal or Glory in Navori Runeterra Open top cut information for either EMEA or APAC. And so you're going to notice players like Karashi that have an asterisk next to them. And what this means is I didn't count anybody's results for either of those events that I'm missing information on. And again, I'm only missing it for EMEA and APAC, so I did count those for the Americas players. But there are players like Karashi who I know got second place at the Glory and Navori Runeterra Open, so I wanted to remind myself of that with an asterisk next to their total, because technically, what I know for a fact is that Karashi is actually looks like this. But it doesn't feel right to chart only the players that I know and then leave off the players that I don't know, so I just went ahead and did it with a little asterisk. I hope that makes sense, because we'll be referring to this chart a lot as I go over players. So now let's try and jump into my actual power rankings. Coming in at number 16 is someone that I would be surprised to see on anyone else's top 16 power rankings, or their power rankings, even if they go down to like top 24 or something along those lines. This player is a bit of a called shot, as I feel like your last place spot usually should be. And you are probably going to be a little upset if you look at this in a different way and you look at like players from the top of this list that did not make it onto my power rankings, and then you see this player coming instead. You're gonna be like, Boulevard, what are you talking about? So just want to prepare you for that. But my number 16 spot on the power rankings is PVH from EMEA, getting in off of Fate's Voyage Onward points. Now, the reason for PVH in my mind is this chart here. Nope, that's Shaker. PVH here. So 4 tops for the year, nothing crazy, right? Usually the top end of a region has players with 7 tops, right? Get over here, more 7 tops. So like 7's kind of the high end, 6 and 5 is like your sort of runs all the way down, usually like the top half of these lists, right? So 4 is actually a relatively low number when we're looking at players that are qualified for the World Championship. But what PVH has going for them is how consistently they made it to the top 16 or further. And beyond that, I spoke earlier about how do you actually do your tier list. Is it based on player skill? Is it based on number of tops? Is it based on X factor? When we look at the previous World Championships, you need to be a little crazy in your deck selection to win the whole event. Alan ZQ did it with Shellfolk, or Aragorn did it with Black Flame Talia. PVH has run some crazy fucking decks this year to get to these top 16s and this top 4. This top 4 came with Braum Swain in one of the Eternal Opens. That's insane. One of their top 16s, all 3 of these top 16s are from the Fates Voyage Onward season, by the way. One of these was with Heimerdinger Volibear. PVH has that X factor in terms of bringing that one totally off the wall deck that can win you the world championship. And that is why they are coming in at my number 16 spot. That is why. I think that they have the ability to identify that crazy third deck that has historically performed well in Legends of Runeterra and ride that to an actual win. Am I confident in their ability to top over some of the other players that I didn't rank here? No. But you gotta call your shot sometimes. So, coming in at number 15, we have Drissoth. And this could have been 4LW. Drissoth and 4LW are 2 players who I only wanted to put one of them on the list because AM has let me down too much to really chart too many of them. But when we just look at Drissoth and 4LW side by side, these are 2 incredibly strong players. And I know that. I know that about them. But their years were a little mediocre. You know, just a lot of top 64 32s out of 4LW, followed by that second place in the final hour. Drissoth kind of like came in early, won the World's Qualifier, and then kind of took the rest of the year off, didn't take it as seriously. But I know that Drissoth, and this could have been 4LW again, are incredibly strong players that are really going to dial it in for the World Championship. Now, why did I put Drissoth over 4LW? There's one main reason, and it's that I'm fucking rooting for Drissoth. I like the guy. I think he's a very strong player, and I think he needs a vote of confidence sometimes. And if he needs to look at my top 16 power rankings and see his name on there to get out of his own head and go do what he needs to do to top the World Championship, then by God, I'm going to do it because I fucking like the guy. So that's why Drissoth's on here. And I think that he's a top 5 player in the Americas. I think that's not a hot take. I know his numbers don't super reflect that for the year, but that's kind of the whole point of this, right? I'm not just grabbing the top 8 EMEA players and then like the top 5 APAC players and the top 3 AM players and throwing them up on this fucking chart, right? There is a level of subjectivity to it that you have to be able to look past the numbers and let your personal bias get in the way, which is what I did with Drissoth. Coming in at number 14, we have Sora Haru's year, again, nothing to really write home about. And there are some players who like had some strong years that just aren't going to make it onto this list because, again, we're looking for that X factor. And in the case of Sora Haru, part of it is having 6 tops and having a 50% get past top 32 rate. That is something I'm going to be mentioning a lot, is like I'm looking for players not just with a high number of tops, but how often did you make it out of top 64, top 32? Because Worlds is just a top 64 bracket. If you're constantly bunking out in top 64, top 32, then you're probably not going to make it very far. And again, it's like kind of weird because there is a Swiss portion of this tournament, but it's also only 64 players, so you're probably treating it more like a top 64 than you would a traditional Swiss bracket, just because it's such a closed environment. And that's where I think players that are consistently making it out of top 64 are really going to shine. Sora Haru, of course, also being a World's Qualifier champion, the different one than Drissoth. I think just like puts them in my mind as one of the top Japanese players, and I'm not going to get caught off guard like I did and everyone did with Yamato and not put any Japanese players on this list. I think Sora Haru, definitely the number 1 Japanese player coming into this tournament, and I will root for them. So moving up, coming in at number 13, I don't fully remember these, so they're a little bit of a surprise to me too when I unveil them. Anopheles. Anopheles is a problem child. Anopheles pisses me off because they are someone that I know has gone by multiple names over the course of this year. I think it was Anopheles, FM Pack Yourself, and like YNBL Jokerage are the 3 that I know of. And so it's possible that this number isn't even correct. It's possible that like I forgot to change their name in a couple of the events when I was like control Fing to find them. So Anopheles might even have more. But a second place and a win, that's hard to beat, right? It's also part of it that it's like, okay, yeah, I don't actually know. But when we're looking at the year as a whole, you're going to notice a couple of players with 2 victories, not very many. And then there's a couple of players that have like the second place and the first place. At least Guy with CS is one, Anopheles is another one. And ultimately, I think this is someone who I'm looking forward to seeing a little bit more of. I don't actually have like a crazy amount of information on them, but this is someone who I think is a solid player, who I want to see continue to do well. And just someone that I'm kind of rooting for, even if like their year isn't spectacular and flashy. They don't have like a crazy number of tops, but again, it's sort of like the Drissoth factor where it's like when you do make it past the top cut, you've got a pretty good shot of going all the way. Coming in at number 12. We have Boxer, which might surprise some of you because earlier in the year, I tweeted out saying that like, you know, Boxer is probably a top 3 EMEA player. I've dialed back on that a little bit, and it actually has very little to do with the controversy surrounding Boxer. What it does, well, it doesn't have nothing to do with the controversy, specifically because, for those of you not caught up on the drama, there's Big Boxer and Little Boxer, right? there is now someone on Twitter who has identified themselves as Little Boxer, who is claiming that they are a different person than Big Boxer. And you know what? I'm going to take that at face value. I'm going to believe them, which means that every top that Little Boxer has gets eliminated from Big Boxer's record. And there actually was one event that was topped just by Little Boxer and not Big Boxer. And so when we look at Boxer's year as a whole as just Big Boxer, it's, you know, it's the 2 wins, which obviously is very good. That's very good, right? Not going to take that away from them. But outside of that, overall, a pretty mediocre year. And those 2 wins came in at the final hour. And the thing that's crazy about this to me is that when we look at Boxer on paper, they've actually just had a worse year than AJ the Pro. AJ the Pro won the same 2 fucking events that Big Boxer did, and then had more top cuts aside. And I don't think people are putting AJ the Pro in the top 5 or maybe even the top 10. And so it would actually be wild to do the same for Boxer. In fact, I'm just going to spoil it right now. Who's that next to Boxer? You guessed it, it's AJ the Pro. Because again, a very comparable year to Boxer. The main difference being Boxer did it in the EMEA, AJ did it in the Americas. And EMEA is widely regarded to be a tougher region. But with 2 additional tops, I'm putting AJ a little bit higher than Boxer. And so yeah, I think Boxer just like has that sort of recency bias, has the controversy surrounding them. It's a name that everybody's been thinking about, but I think we might actually be overplaying Boxer's success in the year, especially compared to other Worlds competitors. Like, don't get me wrong, 2 wins in a row is insane, but Boxer's not the only one that did that. Boxer's like the 3rd or 4th person that did that. So yeah, it's going to bump down a little bit for me, especially given like how mediocre the rest of the year was, especially when we take away the Little Boxer stuff. So yeah, Boxer gets knocked down a peg. As far as AJ the Pro goes, yeah, I think that I'm trying really hard not to lean into an AM bias, but 2 wins in a row, like I said, that's pretty fucking good. You can't deny that. A little worried about AJ's ability to make it past that outside of this. Might have just had a really good read on the Fates Voyage Onward meta, and it's a similar issue I have with Boxer, where it's maybe because you won 2 events in the same standard format, with obviously there was a balance patch in between. I'm a little worried that like maybe you just did really well, like you just clicked really well with Fates Voyage Onward, and now you're not going to click as well with Fates Voyage Beyond, and you're not going to do super well at the World Championship. But I am confident that like these are obviously 2 very strong players. The one other thing about Boxer that's worth mentioning is that I feel like because there's so much controversy around this player, people are really going to get in their own heads when they play against Boxer and go, oh, I gotta beat this guy. I can't lose. I can't. And they're just going to like psych themselves out when playing against him. And it's going to be a shit show. Now we're getting into the top 10 already. I know that seemed really fast, and it probably was. But getting into the top 10, coming in at number 10 on Boulevard's 2023 Power Rankings, we have Aurora. So Aurora's year, not terrible. You know, coming in at the top of APAC in terms of total tops, you know, not in love with this number being so high, the top 64, top 32, but Aurora is just like, Aurora is someone that I know is a very good player. And I was very shocked not to see them make it out of the top 16 last year. I really thought like Aurora was one of the shoo-ins for the top 8 and like best player in the world. They were like up there with Teddy in terms of their 2022 performance. And now Teddy's not even at Worlds. So like Aurora's really got to carry that flag for me. And I think they absolutely deserve the top 10 spot. That's really all I have to say about Aurora. I feel like I don't have to defend them that much. Coming in at number 9, we have Aikido. And maybe Aikedo's going to be a little upset I didn't put him in the top 8, but whatever, man. I put him in the top 10. It's as good as you're going to get out of me. So when we look at Aikedo's year, really came into their own. You know, has 7 tops just behind Mudkip, but also tied with like 6 other players in the Americas. And when we look at the other performances, you know, like did better than Majin Bay by winning an event when like Majin had a 64-32. It's better than Tank, right? Like had a top 4 over a top 16. Tank won a more important event, because one of the things that you have to keep in mind, and that like I haven't talked on much, but I am keeping in mind, is that like Aikido won an Eternal event while Tank won a standard event. And so I do internally weigh Eternal wins a little bit lower than standard wins. And I also kind of weigh like older wins a little bit lower because they're so far removed from the format that we're going to be playing in. So like recent plus Eternal, pretty good. Would have preferred, you know, one of the more recent standard events, but AJ kind of hogged all of those. So like, I think Aikedo's coming into this event confident, cool and clear, calm and collected, with good testing, understanding what they did wrong at the 2021 World Championship, where their testing kind of failed them. And ultimately, I'm very excited to see what Aikido can actually bring to the table here. That said, they're still an Americas player, so can't put them too high, right? There are some Americans above them, but coming in, getting into our top 8, we have Card Gamer. Card Gamer has had a crazy year, especially given that this is Card Gamer's. I don't think this is the first year they have a top cut, and I don't really know if this is their first year competing, because Card Gamer is a name that I recognize from Twitch chats a while ago, but they might have been more of a viewer, maybe not taking the seasonals very seriously. Now that Card Gamer has buckled down and taken the year seriously, they have 6 tops, which is a lot. But they also have a 66% conversion rate to get beyond the top 64 and 32, with a win, a top 4, a couple of top 16s, and only bunking out in top 64, 32 a couple of times. On paper, Card Gamer is a threat, and they are probably one of the more rookie players on this, but the fact that like their rookie year came out with 6 tops, kind of insane. We had 12 events. 12 events for the year. World Ender Seasonal, the 4 Glory and Navori events, the 3 Heart of the Huntress events, the 3 Fates Voyage Onward events, and the LCQ. In fact, that's actually one of the things about Boxer that I wanted to bring up. Is one of the things about Boxer's record here is one of these top 64-32s was the LCQ. So like the LCQ is something I'm weighing a lot lower as well, because a lot of like the best players in the game couldn't participate in it. And that's where one of Boxer's tops came from. So like, again, feel like on paper, Boxer, a good year, but not a great year. Not as good as some of these other players. Like Card Gamer's year, I actually like more than Boxer's. Had a better spread, did more competitive events. Obviously, like beating Floppy Mudkip in the finals was like a huge deal because it stopped Floppy's three-peat. So like Card Gamer and RPG in general, I think just certified threat. Absolutely deserve to be in the top 8. And for those of you unaware, after this video goes live, I'll actually be going on a podcast to argue with Attack about power ranking. So like, if you're looking for me to get my comeuppance and have someone tell me that I'm being stupid, don't worry, I'm sure Baya has you covered. Coming in at number 7, we have FNP Chenia. Now, I don't know that Chenia really needs defending. 4th place rather at Worlds last year, but outside of that, you know, not a spectacular year in terms of like no wins, no second places. There are players with better on paper records. But again, one of the things sticking out to me is a 50% conversion rate with 6 tops to make it out of the top 64/32. Chenia and double top 4. One of the only players with 2 top 4s. Now, obviously, there are players with like 2 wins or a second and a win, but like 2 top 4s is still incredibly solid. I think Chenia's play last year was like, I really didn't like his deck choices. So last year, Chenia did Varus, Aatrox, and Vayne Kayn, and I took issue with this. I really wanted it to be Kayn Aatrox, or like Vayne Aatrox and then Varus Kayn, or something like that. I don't remember exactly, but like I didn't like this pairing, and I wanted this to be a different pairing. That said, Chenia also got like a lot of like quote-unquote cheesy victories. Like almost single-handedly, Chenia was responsible for getting the 3-2 elusive nerfed out of the cultist package, because Chenia stole so many wins with those cultists. It was actually kind of dumb. And actually, I probably should swap these players, but we'll get around to that later. So yeah, Chenia last year, like, didn't perform as well on the world stage. Like, obviously had a very good finish on the world stage, but like, I want them to choose better decks, and I want them to get less cheesy victories, because I feel like players just kind of remember the cultist, the blooming cultist, I think it was called, like stealing a bunch of games, especially like Grandpa Roji in to like get it out of groups in general. Like it was just like a blooming cultist came through and like stole it. So I think that's what a lot of people remember from Chenia last year. But again, I was very high on Korea last year, probably going to be very high again on Korea this year, because they didn't let me down. And so yeah, Chenia makes it back into the top 8. Moving on to number 6, we have Karashi. Karashi's got a stacked record, man. Again, this 7 should be an 8, and there should be a 2nd place here. So with 8 total tops and a 50% conversion rate, that's better than Floppy Mudkip. You know, and there were no wins for Karashi, but Karashi is also a seasonal champion from the previous year. I believe it was the World Walker seasonal, not the World Ender seasonal. So like, yeah, I don't think I really need to defend Karashi too much, on top of the fact that like they made it through off of yearly points, while, from my understanding, losing all of their points from their 2nd place finish at the Glory and Navori Open, as well as being barred from playing in the Glory and Navori Worlds qualifier. So like, had a lot of points taken away from them, and still made it in off of yearly points. Absolutely insane stuff from Karashi. So don't really feel the need to talk too much more about them. Coming in at number 5. We're getting into the top 5, folks. I'm sure a lot of you are excited for this. We have, I forget who, but it's Ultraman. Ultraman is probably, inarguably, top 2, maybe top 3 EMEA. I think Ultraman's insane. So when we look at the year as a whole, again, won the World Interseasonal. So we know for a fact that his chart actually looks like this. It's a 66% rate to make it past top 64, as well as like a win, a top 4, a top 8, a top 16, like absolutely insane. The one problem I sort of have with Ultraman is that they tend to play very safe decks. Every time that I come through and do a meta review and I'm like, oh, I hate this deck, Ultraman plays that deck. And usually it ends up being a low threat density deck. We're talking Conservatory, we're talking Nora Swain. These are Ultraman decks, and these are decks that I do not particularly respect. So while Ultraman is one of the most solid players in EMEA and the world, I'm afraid that he's just solid. I'm afraid that he's missing that X factor to find that kooky third deck that is apparently the secret sauce for winning a Legends of Runeterra World Championship. The reason that I put PVH on here is something that I think Ultraman is lacking, and I would love to be proven wrong on that. I think he's got it in him. I think he knows what it takes. He's going to be very solid. I think he's a great pick to make a deep run. I don't know that he's the best pick to be the world champion, and so I'm really looking for Ultraman to disprove the history that you need some cheesy quote-unquote third deck in order to win the world championship, and you can just play solid and you can just play what you know and get in here and win the damn thing. So very high on Ultraman. Now let's get into number 4. We have FNP JO1. JO1's kind of had a cracked year. JO1's kind of a cracked player. JO1's kind of had a cracked career. Again, 50% top rate with 6 top, or 50% out of top 64 with 6 tops, including a first and a second, which, like, I don't consider a first and a second that different from 2 wins. So JO1, not only incredibly strong on paper, but absolutely has that X factor that I'm looking for to, like, have that weird deck, or even just, like, a very different version of the lists than everyone else. One thing that JO1 is known for consistently is running just too many one-ofs. And if Seraphine has taught us anything, it's that that's just as consistent as you need it to be. You can find the right piece in the right moment, and I don't think anyone's really going to be surprised to see JO1 come through and do absolutely incredible things. Again, just like another super solid Korean player. Again, Boulevard's big on Korea. You shouldn't be surprised by this. I was big on them last year. They didn't let me down. No reason not to be big on them this year. Speaking of being big on Korea, number 3, we have KDF Reroll. 3rd place in last year's Worlds, and KDF Reroll actually has like one of the most insane stats here, where they are the only player with 7 seasonal tops to have a higher than 50% conversion rate to make it out of top 64. And in fact, 3 top 8s and a 2nd place. These are insane fucking numbers that Reroll has been putting up. They put up incredible play last year at the World Championship, all the way to a 3rd place finish, getting their revenge on Chenia, who they failed to beat in the World's qualifier stage. And again, something that I talked about last year is, like, Reroll goes to a level of testing that a lot of players don't, where in their match against Chenia for their spot at Worlds last year, Reroll, like, played the timer game, wherein the rules on it were a little bit more hazy than they are now, I guess, but, like, understood that, like, that was a win condition that they could play towards in that matchup and just play really fast game 3, and it didn't quite work out. But, like, you have to be so solid on the fundamentals underneath of that to even come up with something like that in testing. And so very, very excited to see what Reroll brings to the table. Now that Chenia and JO1 are both at Worlds with the FNP tag, though, you know, FNP might be a serious threat, especially when they're fielding like 2 of the best players in Korea. Now we're going to get down to the good stuff, and I'm going to reveal our number 1 and our number 2 player at the same time, because I think when I show number 2, you're going to be able to guess number 1. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're going through this, you're going Boulevard. There's still so many players that you've left off of here. We're looking at, like, top players from their regions, like, you know, tell me number 1's not Majin Bay. Where's Tank? Where's Krios? Where's Matri? Where's Brazil? I know. And you can all shove it. My number 1 and number 2 pick for this year's World Championship are RPG players. Got Floppy Mudkip, and at least I got the CS. Floppy's had a fucking insane year. I don't think I really have to defend Floppy at number 1. If anything, I have to defend the fact that this is the only thing I'd have to defend is the region. Again, I have an Americas player at number 1. But this is only my 2nd Americas player in the entire top 8, all right? So give me that at least. You got to give me that at least. But I think Floppy at number 1 is very defensible. When we look at least I got the CS. You might be wondering, you know, why them? Out of all these different players, why at least I got the CS? And again, we're looking at like a 50% good conversion rate out of past top 64. We're looking at a second place and a first place, which again I consider relatively close to just 2 firsts. I'm not gonna like really bunk you on that second place. On top of the fact that they're an RPG player, and RPG I think is taking things to a level of testing that not a lot of teams are, and I'm very confident that their players are going to do well. That's why I have 3 of them in the top 64, or in the top 16, in the top 8 rather. So let's talk honorable mentions. This is mostly going to be talking to the Americas players, where they're like, where's my favorite player? You know, because there are a lot of players with 7 tops that I didn't put in here. Like Krios, like Maitri, like Tank, like Majin. Why didn't I put Tank in the top 16? I think is one of the questions I'm going to get asked the most. They're an RPG member. They're coming from Worlds last year. They have a Worlds qualifier win. Why not Tank? Number 1, I'm not totally convinced that Tank has solved all of their nerve issues. Tank had a very public throw last year. I don't want to really harp on the 0-3 performance from last year's Worlds off of Tank, but like had a really big misplay that cost them the game, and I think it was just getting nervous. Now, Tank's been performing a lot better this year. I think they might be over their nerves, but I'm not 100% on that. And also, the one thing that's really sticking out to me is Tank's win was with a super comfort deck on their part in Nardarius, and I think Samira was in it as well. But Tank was talking about how like that was a pet deck of theirs, and I'm concerned that Tank needed that comfort level, and I think a lot of Tank's decks that I associated him with have been heavily nerfed. And so I don't think the level of comfort is going to be there for Tank. And I think Tank might need that a little bit more than some of the other RPG members. That's why I don't have Tank on the top. On top of the fact that like I can't just put a bunch of fucking Americas players in here. I'm actually not happy with my region distribution here. Maybe you already counted it up, but I have 5 Americas players, 5 APAC players, and 6 EMEA players. Which, that's way too balanced for my taste. But if I just like flipped one of the AM players for an EMEA player, then like I have 7-5-4, which feels a lot less balanced and a lot better. So like I'm not gonna harp on it too much. But outside of that, you know, why not Maitri? Maitri never making it past the top 8. On top of the fact that like Maitri, last year I had this thing with Grandpa Roji where I stopped putting Roji on my players to watch for seasonals because Roji just kept consistently letting me down. That's Maitri this year. I keep rooting and hoping and clawing for Maitri, and I'm just not getting there. On top of the fact that, like, while Ninetales put 3 players into Worlds, JoJo and Space had, like, some medium-looking years. And I believe I think JoJo's top 8 was actually even the LCQ. So, like, we've got some of the players with just the lowest tops, not just in the Americas, but, like, across the board as Maitri's testing partners. And I'm just not really convinced that, like, Ninetales is going to be able to figure it out. 4LW, like I mentioned, interchangeable with Drisoth. I don't want you to think that, like, I'm disrespecting 4LW. Hawk is actually someone I wanted to put on the list, but I just couldn't really find a place for it. But, like, I think Hawk would probably be one of my next picks for Americas players. Don't want you to sleep on Hawk. Again, I've been talking about this conversion rate of tops getting past top 64, and Hawk's got that. And like a win in a top 4. The win is the LCQ, so like, you know, not as impactful, but is what it is. Krios, I just didn't really have anything that like stands out to me about Krios. Majin, I fear has been like, trust me, dude, I wanted to put Majin in there, but I don't like, if I had like 8 more spots, if I did like top 24, I still don't think Majin's making it. I think Majin's had a very distracted year, and while I'm sure he's going to dial in for the World Championship, I'm not really sure what that's going to look like. I don't know what his testing group is like. I'm not super confident that Majin can just like pull the miracle out of his ass. I'm hopeful for it, very hopeful for it. Love Majin Bay, not confident in it, and I definitely don't want to like take away a highlight spot from a player like PVH, just like stroke Majin's ego a little bit. Majin's ego will be fine. Yeah, that's about it. That's about it. Obviously, like, you know, Sorry, I wanted to put Sorry in there, but Sorry had such like a I like Sorry. I still remember Sorry having a very disappointing 2022. I thought Sorry was like one of the best players in the EMEA in 2021, and like these results don't speak to a comeback, at least not a full comeback. And I'd love to see Sorry do well. Sorry's another player that like I love, but I gotta take at a certain point I gotta take bias out of it. Look at the numbers. Talpinator is someone that I think like if I had another 4 spots, like if I did top 20, I think Talpinator would have made it in. I think I would have put Talpinator in there. Talpinator and Sequoia, actually. Very similar numbers that we're looking at here. Like, I think if I was going to do a top 20, like, Talpinator and Sequoia probably would have been next on the list, followed by maybe Hawk. Maybe Hawk would have been a little bit lower down. But, like, again, just because they didn't make my top 16, like, there's, you know, 50 players that didn't make my top 16. So don't for a second think that I'm like counting everybody else out. But just some players that I wanted to shout out again, like Topinator Sequoia, very good numbers. APAC, no one else was really jumping out at me in APAC. I kind of like I kind of like cheaped out here and just grabbed the top 5 from APAC and threw them in there. But when I have my Korea bias, as I do, and you've got 3 Koreans in your top 5, Boulevard's going to grab them. Aurora's just like someone who I was really hopeful for last year and had an insane year in terms of like tops, so like not gonna not put them in there. And then Sora Haru is like standing out to me as like one of the best Japanese players. Challenger skills, if I had to put like one more APAC player in there, it actually probably would have been Challenger skills. I think they've had another like really good spread of making it past top 64, and maybe I'm focusing too much on this because I feel like I've talked about this stat so much. Maybe I'm looking a little bit too hard at your conversion rate of making it past top 64 in order to influence my decisions. But I don't want you to think that like I just grabbed the fucking top 5 APAC players and threw them in there. They just like the top 5 APAC players had such good years in terms of the one stat that I'm really harping on here, which is your top cuts past top 64, and then like Aurora is just Aurora, so they're gonna make it in anyway. So that has been my top 16 power rankings for the 2023 World Championship. Feel free to leave a comment, a like. Don't DM me about it. Leave a comment. If you're gonna flame me, I need the engagement. I gotta pump those YouTube numbers up. So if you want to flame me, you got to do it in the comment section where I can. And don't wait until after Worlds to flame me. You got to do it now. You got to do it before Worlds. You can't watch like Sorry win Worlds and then be like, oh, don't you feel dumb for not putting Sorry in your top 16? No, I don't. Thank you so much for watching. I've been Boulevard, and again, if you're catching this like as it goes live, I will be on a podcast with Buy Attack later to talk about this a little bit more. So I'm gonna wait until after that to respond to any comments, just so like I'm coming back with a fresh view where it's like, oh, well, like, maybe I don't even agree with this after that, right? So that's all. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.